Dr. Walter Veith is a member of the Seventh-day Adventist organization. He is featured on a channel now called Catholic Cult Exposed. And in his videos you will see the standard operating procedure for Seventh-day Adventists, and that is to lie as much as they can and slander the Catholic Church with an incorrect interpretation of the Scripture to start with. So since he is featured on a YouTube user now, that brings what he teaches into question. So what I'm going to begin to do now is to start a series of videos on the teachings of Dr. Walter Veith to show you just how badly this man misinterprets the Scripture. This is supposed to be a scholar in the Seventh-day Adventist organization, and he cannot get one verse of Scripture right. And I will show you exactly what I'm talking about in this series. But I want to set it up with this introduction video by saying, first of all, if you will notice his writings, he is interpreting the Bible just the way Ellen White says it in her writings. In other words, she has now become the infallible interpreter of Scripture for the Seventh-day Adventist organization. Now they would say, well, Ellen White doesn't interpret the Bible. Yes, she does interpret the Bible too. You know, you play that game with somebody who doesn't know. I know better. You see, I had a lot of professors who interpreted verses of Scripture for me when I was studying the Bible in seminary and in college. And if I were to go out and someone would ask me, how do you interpret this verse of Scripture? And I say, well, Professor so-and-so says this about it. Then what I'm giving is that professor's interpretation of it. It may not be attached to me then, but I'm giving that professor's interpretation of it. But then when somebody asks me about that verse of Scripture, and I just give them that professor's interpretation without ever saying that professor interpreted it, then it becomes mine then. It's my interpretation then. You see, what happened is that these people would have these interpretations to cover up for the failed prophecies that was going on at the time, to cover up for the failed prediction of the return of Christ in 1844. And so Ellen White was a woman of convenience in that she, when someone would interpret the Scripture, like Joseph Bates or O.R.L. Cozier, then she would have a vision of convenience to put her inspired stamp of approval on that interpretation. But later on in her books, such as Testimonies, Early Writings, Desires of the Ages, and The Great Controversy, she repeats those things and interprets those verses as well. When she started interpreting them, they became hers then. So please don't give me the stuff that she didn't interpret the Bible and this is not what she taught. When she began interpreting it, it became hers. When she had her vision showing they were right, it became hers. And now her writings are used as the infallible interpretation of Scripture. You see, Dr. Veith cannot interpret the verses that he's using in his videos unless they agree with the writings of Ellen White. I don't know if Seventh-day Adventists ever catch on to that or not, but there's not a major doctrine that they have that is not interpreted by the writings of Ellen White, making her the infallible interpreter for the Scripture. But the thing about it is, this infallible interpreter is a false prophetess who predicted the return of Jesus Christ in 1844, and he did not return then. Now there are a lot of people who question that. I want you to show you something here. This is the Testimonies of the Church, and there's several volumes of this put out by the trustees of Ellen G. White Publications. It's put out by those people in 1844. Or 1843, when Jesus did not return. Then on page 53 of this, and I've got it highlighted in red here, the thing you want to pay attention to is down toward the bottom, where it says, those who had been disappointed were not long left in darkness, for in searching the prophetic periods with earnest prayer, the error was discovered, and the tracing of the prophetic pencil drawn through the tarrying time in the joyful expectations of the coming of Jesus, the apparent tearing of the vision had not yet been taken into account, and was as sad and unlooked for in surprises. Yet this trial was necessary to develop strength and in truth. Now look at close at this part here. Our hopes now centered on the coming of the Lord in 1844. So please do not tell me Ellen White did not predict the return of Jesus Christ on October 22nd of 1844. in Testimonies of the Church, put out by the Ellen White Trustees Publishing. In her own writings, there she is strictly saying our hopes now centered on the coming of the Lord in 1844. So again, please do not tell me this woman did not predict the return of Jesus Christ. And you know what that makes her, since he did not return, that makes her a false prophetess. So now what Dr. Veith is doing in his attempt to slander the Catholic Church is using what they consider to be the infallible, inspired writings of a false prophetess. It's in your writings, Seventh-day Adventists, not mine. It's in your writings. More in my videos dealing with Dr. Veith. Until then, God bless.